As we finish out the regular season, great time to have Mike Sando on. Love talking about the quarterbacks and the futures with them. And you can read his most recent piece on The Athletic, trying to get into a timeline of the Russell Wilson stuff, which I know has been news for a few days, but I think it plays into the overall kind of transition that a lot of teams are going to be looking at. So let's start. Look, you know the Russell Wilson story, I think, as well as anybody. You, even when the trade had happened, you're like, hey, man, he's really been declining here in Seattle. I understood Denver, when you're that desperate, it's gone wrong for you. Every transaction, every decision at that position, you're just like, whatever, we'll go here. And I thought maybe it would go better. It went terrible last year. It's slightly better this year. But the real story is the ask for him to waive the injury guarantee or move that date back or be benched. And now we're kind of left with trying to figure out what the timeline is. So can you take us back to like the beginning when you'd heard rumblings about there being an ask from management side to Russell Wilson?
Yeah, so I guess we found out since then, Russell himself confirmed that it was that bye week, whatever, October 29th. I think I was hearing some things, not that long after that he actually had waived the guarantees with what I had heard. So, I didn't have enough information to certainly report it. I just sort of sat on it. And then as time went on, I was getting more and more curious. And I had some people, who can look at the contracts, right? There's people in the Players Association side and on the team side who can actually look at the deal. And I finally asked somebody, could you look at this and see if it's been changed? And it had not been changed. But sort of the whole time, just, knowing what I know too about not just Russell Wilson, but Shawn Payton, I was kind of waiting for a spot along the way for them to bench him and thinking this is going to be coming sometime. And it just didn't come. And I think Payton alluded to it. They were, they won some games on turnovers and that sort of a thing. And so when it finally did happen, I don't think it was a huge surprise that Shawn Payton wasn't in love with Russell Wilson. But the way Russell characterized that, negotiation or back and forth, that they basically had threatened him to bench him if he didn't change the deal, was confusing because they didn't bench him after that. Then we learned the NFL and the Players Association were involved. So I don't think we have the entire full story, but as I wrote Monday, the fact that Denver or no sources close to Payton or the Broncos, they haven't really pushed back on Russell's version of this. So it feels to me like some version of that happened, and that just spells even more the end to me. It's not something you would do, right, to somebody that was in your plans.
Yeah, I read your piece and I was like, ooh, maybe that happened. And then you would counter your own position and I'd be like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense there too, because you feel like Peyton's never afraid to say anything. So if he thought Russell Wilson was full of shit, then he would say something at this point. Like he clearly doesn't like the guy. I found it ironic a little bit that Russell Wilson decided to actually give us an answer with any real depth to it for the first time in forever. But I also think he's so worried about how he's perceived. Like this was so embarrassing for him that he was like, all right, I will tell you my version of things. But you're right. He played 7 more weeks and it may just have been that Denver got a little scared because, I mean, how rare is the ask when you talk to other people around the NFL? How rare would this be? Because, look, NFL contracts are kind of renegotiated on the fly all the time anyway, but this is such a big number. It's the quarterback. What was the reaction around the league from people you talked to?
That it's not uncommon to ask for certain things to be changed in a contract, but this specific thing is unusual. Like people couldn't think of a time you would go to somebody and say, hey, let's forfeit some injury guarantees. That's a little bit more fundamental to the deal, the structure of a deal, right? You might go to somebody and say, hey, could we change this date here of when this money is going to hit the books? Or, certainly there's been pay reductions or things like that have been talked about, but to fundamentally give up guarantees is not. So I think most people found that to be kind of, a little troubling or not looking good for the Broncos on that side. And the fact that, like you said, they haven't counted it. Now, the other thing you said is interesting. Like Russell Wilson has a lot of pride and obviously cares a lot about, it's embarrassing to be demoted, right? I mean, for anybody, especially to be on that high of a platform as he is, making all that money. We saw last year how important the status was to him. Everything was about his status, right? I mean, he's posting pictures of his house and everything was about being a star. So it has to be a tremendous come down, a big humbling thing. So you could see in that moment, maybe if that happened to you or me, that you would want your story out there and you might convey that, hey, I was really sort of wronged by the team, because that's what the focus has become. So that's was my initial suspicion. Really, was like, okay, is he just saying this part because it makes him seem sympathetic? But I think that's a pretty cynical way to look at it. If the Broncos don't suggest that, right? There's been no inkling of that. So I think you have to take Russell's reaction a little bit more at face value. Like we said, that's been hard to do because everything seemed kind of contrived, but it's really the ball's in the Broncos' court to tell us it wasn't that way.
Yeah, like I've seen some people go like, hey, he's better. I remember even Get Up having a segment where it was like, do we owe Russell Wilson an apology? And it's like, no, you should write a thank you note to the defense because they were forcing a remarkable number of turnovers. And I think there were like 15 turnovers in 4 games, and we were tracking it the whole time. And yeah, he's better than he was last year, but last year, no quarterback would even have kept his job, but they had already made the investment and all these different things into it. So look, this isn't breaking news. Anybody listening to me talk about Russell Wilson on this podcast, because I think everybody knows that I haven't been the biggest fan, although I know that I've been fair about how good he was at times as a quarterback. I remember at ESPN even arguing for him to be MVP, I think, over Brady, until like the very end, it was clear Brady was going to win it. So the reason I say all those things is like kind of your point. Like, I just wonder if he had handled himself differently, if Payton would be more willing to work with him and not want to embarrass him. Because this is embarrassing. And it was embarrassing on the sideline for a guy that's been in the league and has the resume Russell Wilson does to yell at him the way he did. But I also wonder, like, when you're in the building with the guy, if that was that's Payton going, I can't help it anymore. I think the simple answer is like, hey, when you have a 37 QBR and a 50 QBR and you're supposed to be the guy in back-to-back years, then everybody's going to be frustrated with you. But I wonder if his own personality had actually finally put him in a position where everybody is collectively out on him.
I think there's 2 components to the Shawn Payton rejection of Wilson. One is what you said, like, here's a Bill Parcells type coach coming in who can't stand the quarterback as the diva, right? Everything that Russell represented last year just goes against every fiber of Shawn Payton's being. Yes, Drew Brees was a star, but he wasn't like that, right? And so I think Shawn Payton came in with this huge power, his ego probably a little bit on overdrive with some of the comments he was making. And hey, this room's only big enough for one star, right? It's going to be Shawn Payton. It's not going to be Russell Wilson. So that's
not 50 QBR Russell Wilson.
Right. But then the other part of it is, but what was Shawn Payton's specific complaint about Russell Wilson early in the year? Because early in the year, they were going back and forth, and then it kind of died down. Like, I think Shawn Payton just sort of said, hey, you know what? I'm going to stop trying even anymore, and we're just going to put the offense in a shell, and we're going to babysit this guy like he's a rookie, okay? That's what happened. That's how you can have the decent stats, but we know you're not really playing, right? And I think that was Payton's frustrating with Russell Wilson's inability, in his opinion, to run the offense at the proper speed and tempo, taking all of this huge amount of information and being able to go, right? When you think of Drew Brees, you think about super processor in charge of everything. And this coach can have his quarterback be an extension of everything he wants to do offensively. And so the first month of the season was Shawn Payton going, we can't get out of the huddle on time. We had to call timeout. Look, we'll wristband it if we have to. Okay. Another slap, another slight. And that went on for a while. And then, like I said, I think we got to that point in the season where he just stopped complaining about it almost. He was frustrated, but it was like, okay, you know what? If we're not going to be able to run the offense the way I want to, then we're just going to throw 1-yard passes every week. And my quarterback's going to be 9 of 14 for 87 yards through about 2.5 quarters. And then when we really have to go, look, he'll hit on some big plays down the field. There'll be some off schedule stuff. But when the quarterback, Russell Wilson, complains and says, hey, let's go 2 minute, let's go up tempo all the time, that's when I'm best, Shawn Payton goes, yeah, it's not a sustainable offense. Kind of in another sort of diminishing way, right? So clearly there's a disconnect there, and Shawn Payton doesn't think he can run his offense how he wants to with Russell Wilson. And that's the crux of this whole thing. If he thought Russell was just a little in front of his skis and the ego stuff and all of that, I think he'd tolerate that. He would push back against that. He would shape that if he thought Russell Wilson could take this offense and really run with it and go to where he wants to go with it. That, to me, is the number one deal breaker in the whole thing for Shawn Payton.
Yeah, look, when you started looking at like the throw charts when they were winning games, and I'd
Yeah.
see the next gen chart for Russell Wilson. Like even if you were watching a game, it's not like I'm watching every single pass attempt for the Broncos on a busy Sunday. And then I go back and look at those throw charts. I'd be like, well, this is, but it's just how we are with wins and losses with these quarterbacks. And we start having these awful segments. All right. So last thing on this, he's still owed all this money. What happens?
Well, I think that they will release him. I don't think they would be able to trade that contract. So I think they would release him, before that 5th day of the league year. This would be sometime in early March. And then they would have a period where instead of his contract counting, I'm going to guess like 40 million, it would count like 80 million until June, start of June. And then 40 of that would be pushed off into the future year. So, it creates some real challenges for them. I mean, I don't know if they're going to, they'll probably have Stidham in the mix, and maybe they draft somebody or whatever. But I would think Russell Wilson would have to be on a different team next year. Now they're going to try to sell the idea that he could come back and all of that, but I just don't see how you do that. I don't see how Russell Wilson would want to do that when he knows he's kind of been disrespected here, right?
Yeah, I think there's like, it's like two paths to the same ending, right? And that is, did they have to do it this way if they knew there was no version he was coming back for the 24 season? They probably didn't. And that'd be the part where I would side with Russell Wilson, where I go, you didn't have to do it this way. You didn't have to ask me to move this injury guarantee for next year and tell me you were going to bench me if I didn't do it. And that might be the tea leaves of all of this. Well, then he played 7 more games. So maybe the NFLPA and Kessler and these people get involved and like, you can't do this. You can't do this. Like, we know you guys can do less.
Oh, yeah.
You can't do this. And maybe that's why Denver steps back. That's why Payton hasn't, or maybe we're getting the sit down in February with Payton where he tells his version of it, but didn't want to do it. But again, the season's kind of lost at this point anyway. And it's not like Payton has much of a governor on his thoughts in the past. So that part of it, like, I guess just to finish the thought, Mike, is like, I get that part of it. And I would get him being like, hey, this is not the way to do business. This is bullshit because you didn't want me back next year anyway.
And then another component of that I think we can see coming is that Shawn Payton has also tried to play the card of, hey, I don't deal with that contract stuff anyways. At the appropriate time after the season, George Payton, these guys will talk about it. And there's some truth to that in that I don't think generally coaches would be into what mechanism would be used in a contract to make it more palatable. They might be apprised of certain things, but Shawn Payton's probably not going to have a lot of strategies on how to maneuver with contracts. Now, he could have been briefed on stuff during the bye, I would think. So that part of it is interesting too. You're right. This could be sort of an elaborate way to play it out as we didn't really bench him over the contract, right? And he's saying they wanted that to be clear, football related decision. Now, I think the most interesting next part of this will be, okay, Russell Wilson's going to go somewhere else. How's this story going to be managed? Because can't you just see, hey, Russell Wilson, according to sources, would consider a return. He would play for the Seahawks for the minimum or something like that. That would put pressure on them you're not going to bring Russell Wilson back? That sort of a thing. How are those types of stories going to come out as far as where Russell could go? Because he's going to make whatever, $37 million next year, no matter what. And whatever he makes on a new deal would offset off of that, meaning, he's going to probably go somewhere on a cheaper deal. So where's that going to be? When are those stories going to start to come out that he'd be willing to do this, to go there, and that sort of a thing? Because the Russell Wilson name is still a big name, right? And for half the league, even if Russell Wilson's a mid quarterback, half the league needs a mid quarterback right now. So that's going to be interesting to see where he wants to go, how that sort of gets out there.
Half the league seems a little high. I'm not like,
okay.
It just, I think there'd be half the league that would be set with starters, and then there'd be another handful of teams that have the young guy that they're just like, let's see our new young guy. So maybe I'll give you a third of the league, but you're right. Like, this is somebody who had a leak where it was like, I'm not asking for a trade, but I wouldn't mind one day playing for the Saints, the Raiders, Chicago. And you were like, what is that? Like, I don't want to cheat on my wife, but if I could pick 4 of your friends, here's how I would rank
Here's
them.
Who they would be.
Right? He wanted Snyder. He wanted Carroll fired because he felt like they were limiting him, Mr. Unlimited. So like, look, I know I can't help myself. I think the most shocking thing that I've seen here is that the handling of this got most of at least the social media public to side with Russell Wilson in a way that I've never seen him backed.
But that's him
in recent years. That's incredible. That's hard to do.
But it is. But I think that Denver miscalculated. Usually these types of discussions behind the scenes don't just come out like that. I think they've just miscalculated on Russell Wilson at every turn. I don't think they thought he was going to do that. I think they were shocked that that was going to come out and they were going to have that narrative late in the year. Well, guess what? It's not shocking if you've been following it. It's not shocking that Russell's play had declined some and that he wasn't going to be what they thought he was going to be. What's happened, some of the extremes have been surprising. But before the season, I thought there was a great chance that Russell Wilson would be benched by midseason and said so. This stuff hasn't been that hard to predict. And that's why I'm saying the next thing will be something like he'd be willing to go to Seattle for the minimum or this or that, those types of things are coming.
I guess I still have one more thing on it though, because I can agree with the handling of it. Like, you're going to threaten to bench me to if I don't move this injury guarantee date. But I think the sympathy was almost a little too much, because ultimately, if anybody were running this football team, you'd be like, at the end of the day, we can't have him back in 24. We can't have him back with Payton. We've now established a new investment peak with what we've done with Payton. He's going to be here for the long haul. And as somebody who's been a part of a few negotiations, you'll be shocked what someone will ask for at some point. You're like, wait, what? Why would I do that? And then the person will be kind of like, well, just
throwing it out there.
Just wanted to see if you'd be into that. Be like, I would never be into that. I'd have to sell my house and move. Well, yeah, no. Okay, so we won't, so like, I wonder if that was like, hey, he's not going to be here. We're already going to have to pay him that money, but we don't want to have to pay even more. Is there any way we just ask him, like, just say, hey, dude, we're going to bench you if you don't move this thing?
Totally.
And then look, it happens. You get asked stuff all the time. You're like, why would you even ask me that? It's like, because there's always a chance that 1% of the people will say yes.
And what's really a threat, Ryan? What defines a threat, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that someone comes up to you and puts a gun in your face and threatens to kill you if you don't give them your wallet, right? A threat could be a subtle, like, hey, about your next contract, what would you think about, because it'd be important. It could be important for us for your future. And you're like, whoa, was that a threat?
Yeah.
There's probably some gray in there, some nuance in there. I don't know that it was to the extent of, hey, let's talk about you're going to be benched. And Russell Wilson said, I'll give away my guarantees to keep my job. Like, I don't necessarily think that's what happened, but it may not have been them saying, listen, you take these things now or you are benched tomorrow. It may not have been that overt either. So, maybe we'll get some clarity on that.